New York City in 1990 was a sprawling graveyard of broken artistic dreams and predatory corporate contracts. A 19-year-old with a shaved head and a battered acoustic guitar sat on a street corner with a stack of freshly duplicated cassette tapes. She was not waiting for an arrogant A&R representative to discover her in a dimly lit dive bar. She was selling her inventory directly out of the trunk of her car, collecting cash by hand and bypassing the industry entirely. The major label machine at the time demanded total, unconditional surrender from unproven talent. A standard contract meant signing away master rights for a meager, heavily taxed advance, entering a brutal cycle of perpetual debt known as recoupment. In this rigged system, the corporation owned the intellectual property forever, while the creator worked tirelessly on the road just to pay back the heavily inflated costs of their own exploitation. DiFranco rejected that exploitative corporate blueprint entirely. Instead of seeking validation from powerful executives sitting in glass towers, she pressed 500 cassettes of her self-titled debut album, funding the entire manufacturing run with a few $1,000s painstakingly saved from playing local acoustic gigs. She bet her meager life savings on her own unvarnished sound, fully aware that failure meant total financial ruin. This singular high-stakes decision was the absolute genesis of Righteous Babe Records. It was not a vanity project designed to stroke a fragile artistic ego, but an aggressive, calculated assertion of equity. By fronting the initial capital and acting as her own chief executive, she retained absolute control over her intellectual property from the very first day of her career, establishing a fortress around her creative output. Operating without a massive corporate safety net meant assuming the crushing burden of manufacturing, distribution, and fulfillment. Every single tape sold at a folding merchandise table or mailed out through a grassroots newsletter required intensive manual labor. The artist had to transform into a meticulous warehouse manager, stuffing envelopes, licking stamps, and tracking inventory while simultaneously writing the complex songs that fueled the entire enterprise. The raw financial margins, however, told a revolutionary story of wealth retention. While a traditional major label artist might see a pathetic 12 cents on a $10 album after recoupment fees were deducted, DiFranco was pocketing over $4 per unit. This immediate, localized cash flow validated her DIY music business models, proving that strict independence could be far more lucrative than a highly publicized corporate signing. Word of mouth operated significantly faster than traditional radio promotion ever could. Her relentless, grueling touring schedule across college towns, subterranean venues, and local coffee shops created a powerful direct-to-consumer pipeline. She was building an intensely loyal, highly monetizable customer base long before the internet made such decentralized infrastructure accessible. She cultivated a dedicated mailing list, capturing the names and addresses of every fan she encountered, ensuring her marketing reach grew exponentially. Major labels eventually noticed the swelling, sold-out crowds and the undeniable organic revenue stream she was generating. Men in expensive suits began arriving at her shows with highly lucrative offers, promising massive global distribution networks and massive upfront cash injections. They desperately wanted to package her fiercely independent folk punk aesthetic for the mainstream masses, but only in exchange for the one vital asset she absolutely refused to surrender. She confidently walked away from every single corporate advance presented to her. DiFranco understood on a fundamental level that major label money was not a benevolent gift, but a predatory, high-interest loan collateralized by her master recordings. She recognized the precise contractual trap that had ensnared countless musical legends before her, actively choosing slow, sustainable operational growth over a sudden, debt-financed explosion of temporary fame. Scaling an independent operation of this magnitude presented entirely new, complex friction points. Moving from selling cassettes in a car trunk to managing national compact disc distribution required intense negotiations with independent pressing plants. She had to establish a legitimate, fully staffed mail-order logistics hub in her hometown of Buffalo, New York, effectively building a functional corporate headquarters from the ground up without any outside investment. The highly anticipated release of her 1992 album imperfectly tested this fragile, newly constructed infrastructure. Pouring the hard-earned profits from her relentless touring schedule directly back into the massive production costs of the new record, she aggressively bet her entire operational budget on the continued loyalty of her expanding fan base. She risked total bankruptcy if the new inventory failed to move quickly at her live shows. The calculated gamble yielded massive, exponential returns. Because she owns her master recordings outright, the critical break-even point on a new release was remarkably low. She achieved true profitability on a mere fraction of the unit sales required by a major label counterpart, allowing her to rapidly reinvest pure, unencumbered profit back into the touring machine and the rapid expansion of her independent label. This localized, undeniable success signaled a massive structural crack in the traditional industry monopoly. The 1990s DIY movement was gaining serious momentum in underground punk circles, but DiFranco was actively proving a highly dangerous concept to the establishment. She demonstrated that an artist could completely bypass the corporate gatekeepers and still achieve massive commercial viability on a national scale without ever compromising their core artistic vision. Her rapidly expanding discography quickly became a highly appreciating financial asset. Because she never signed away the rights to her early work, every new fan who discovered her current music generated pure, immediate profit when they inevitably purchased her older, fully amortized albums. The back catalog transformed into an autonomous, perpetual revenue engine that consistently funded her future endeavors and shielded her from market volatility. Securing national retail placement, however, remained a formidable and deeply frustrating barrier. Independent distributors often lack the sheer corporate leverage required to secure prime, visible shelf space in major chain record stores across the country. This systemic disadvantage forced Righteous Babe Records to rely heavily on alternative retail channels, independent mom-and-pop record shops, and an aggressive, highly targeted direct mail marketing strategy to consistently reach eager consumers. She ingeniously circumvented the traditional retail bottleneck by transforming her live shows into primary, high-volume points of sale. The humble merchandise booth became a highly efficient, incredibly lucrative mobile storefront that traveled with her from city to city. By eliminating the retail middleman entirely, she kept the massive revenue stream highly localized, immediate, and firmly secured within her own tightly controlled corporate ecosystem. By the mid-1990s, the raw, unaudited financial numbers were simply impossible for the mainstream industry to ignore. DiFranco was independently moving hundreds of thousands of physical units without a massive corporate machine behind her. She was achieving certified gold record status and generating millions of dollars in gross revenue without a single dollar of corporate marketing muscle or any significant support from mainstream commercial radio stations. The groundbreaking 1996 release of Dilate pushed her independent operation directly into the mainstream cultural consciousness. Debuting remarkably high on the Billboard Top 100 charts, the album conclusively proved that self-funded, fiercely independent music could compete directly with heavily subsidized pop acts on a national level. It was a massive, undeniable flex of independent operational power that sent shockwaves through executive boardrooms across the country. Traditional media outlets and industry publications were suddenly forced to adapt to her undeniable, overwhelming market presence. Major magazines and television networks that typically only dedicated coverage to major label priorities had to publicly acknowledge her massive footprint. They could no longer ignore the immense cultural and economic impact of this entirely self-funded, artist-run enterprise that was quietly outperforming their heavily manufactured corporate stars. Righteous Babe Records organically evolved from a personal holding company into a legitimate, highly respected cultural institution. The label actively began signing other independent artists, offering them fair, transparent, profit-sharing distribution deals. These highly equitable contracts stood in stark, intentional contrast to the predatory, one-sided agreements that remained standard practice across the broader mainstream music industry. By treating fellow musicians as true partners, she built a formidable roster of talent. The long-term, unshakable economic stability provided by holding complete equity allowed for uncompromising, absolute artistic freedom. DiFranco could seamlessly release experimental acoustic albums, complex spoken word poetry, and deeply polarizing political anthems. She did this without ever consulting a nervous marketing department or worrying about the immediate commercial viability of her creative expressions. Her financial independence meant she never had to chase radio trends or dilute her message to satisfy a parent company. The true, investigative power of her financial blueprint became glaringly evident during brutal, industry-wide economic downturns. When compact disc sales plummeted and rampant digital piracy decimated major label revenues, her low overhead, highly efficient ecosystem effortlessly survived. Her direct-to-fan business model remained largely insulated from the massive macroeconomic shocks that were actively crippling the broader, bloated music business. While major labels scrambled to sue their own consumers, Righteous Babe simply continued to ship records directly to fans. Her relentless, stubborn refusal to compromise forged a definitive blueprint for the modern, highly lucrative creator economy. The radical concept of building a dedicated core audience and monetizing them directly is now celebrated as standard practice. Focusing on strict ownership and direct, unfiltered access is the default strategy for independent creators operating across all modern digital media platforms today. What was once considered career suicide is now taught as fundamental business strategy. Maintaining this sprawling, complex infrastructure required relentless, exhausting vigilance on a daily basis. Managing a dedicated staff, overseeing complex payroll systems, and navigating the dense intricacies of international distribution was incredibly demanding. The artist had to be as fluent in corporate administration and supply chain logistics as she was in songwriting and commanding a stage. There was no clear separation between the boardroom and the recording studio. She was the ultimate decision-maker in both arenas. The major labels eventually attempted to co-opt the raw aesthetic of independence to capture this emerging market. They created deceptive subsidiary imprints, specifically designed to mimic the grassroots, authentic appeal of genuinely independent artists like DiFranco. Yet, they could never replicate the fundamental financial architecture of total artist ownership that made her specific operation genuinely revolutionary. They could fake the punk rock image, but they refused to surrender the master rights that actually defined true independence. Ani DiFranco did not just survive as an outlier outside the traditional music machine, she actively dismantled its perceived necessity. By proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that an artist could retain total equity and still build a highly profitable global empire, she fundamentally altered the balance of power. She revolutionized independent music ownership forever, conclusively proving that the creator could also be the mogul. Her legacy is an uncompromising financial architecture, a quiet money empire that forever changed the business of music.